That summer, Haggerty told Harold Gardner and Jeff Reeves, was the happiest summer of his life. He should have been on the lookout, he said. He should have known that God only puts a rug under guys like him in order to jerk it out from under their feet. The only shadow, he said, was Adrian's extravagantly partisan reaction to dairy. He had a T-shirt which said, "Maine ain't bad, but dairy's great." He had a Dairy Tigers high school jacket, and of course there was the hat. He claimed to find the atmosphere vital and creatively invigorating. Perhaps there was something to this. He had taken his languishing novel out of the trunk for the first time in nearly a year. Was he really working on it then? Gardner asked Haggerty, not really caring but wanting to keep Haggerty primed. Yes, he was busting pages. He said it might be a terrible novel, but it was no longer going to be a terrible unfinished novel. He expected to finish it by his birthday in October. Of course, he didn't know what dairy was really like. He thought he did, but he hadn't been here long enough to get a whiff of the real dairy. I kept trying to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. "And what's dairy really like, Don?" Reeves asked. "It's a lot like a dead strumpet with maggots squirming out of her coos," Don Haggerty said. The two cops stared in silent amazement. "It's a bad place," Haggerty said. "It's a sewer." "You mean you two guys don't know that? You two guys have lived here all of your lives and you don't know that?" Neither of them answered. After a little while, Haggerty went on. 9. Until Adrian Mellon entered his life, Don had been planning to leave dairy. He had been there for 3 years, mostly because he had agreed to a long-term lease on an apartment with the world's most fantastic river view, but now the lease was almost up and Don was glad. No more long commute back and forth to Bangor. No more weird vibes. In dairy, he once told Adrian, it always felt like 13 o'clock. Adrian might think dairy was a great place, but it scared Don. It was not just the town's tightly homophobic attitude, an attitude as clearly expressed by the town's preachers as by the graffiti in Basie Park. But that was one thing he had been able to put his finger on. Adrian had laughed. "Don, every town in America has a contingent that hates the gay folk," he said. "Don't tell me you don't know that. This is, after all, the era of Ronnie Moron and Phyllis Housefly." "Come down to Basie Park with me," Don had replied, after seeing that Adrian really meant what he was saying. And what he was really saying was that dairy was no worse than any other fair-sized town in the hinterlands. "I want to show you something, my love." They drove to Basie Park. This had been in mid-June, about a month before Adrian's murder, Haggerty told the cops. He took Adrian into the dark, vaguely unpleasant-smelling shadows of the Kissing Bridge. He pointed out one of the graffiti. Adrian had to strike a match and hold it below the writing in order to read it. "Show me your cock, queer, and I'll cut it off you." "I know how people feel about gays," Don said quietly. "I got beaten up at a truck stop in Dayton when I was a teenager. Some fellows in Portland set my shoes on fire outside of a sandwich shop while this fat-assed old cop sat inside his cruiser and laughed. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen anything quite like this. Look over here, check it out." Another match revealed, "Stick nails in eyes of all faggots, for God." Whoever writes these little homilies has got a case of the deep-down crazies. I'd feel better if I thought it was just one person, one isolated sickie, but... Don swept his arm vaguely down the length of the Kissing Bridge. "There's a lot of this stuff, and I just don't think one person did it all. That's why I want to leave dairy, Aid. Too many places and too many people seem to have the deep-down crazies." "Well, wait until I finish my novel, okay, please? October, I promise, no later. The air's better here." He didn't know it was the water he was going to have to watch out for, Don Haggerty said bitterly. 10. Tom Boudelier and Chief Rademacher leaned forward, neither of them speaking. Chris Unwin sat with his head down, talking monotonously to the floor. This was the part they wanted to hear. This was the part that was going to send at least 2 of these assholes to Thomaston. "The fare wasn't no good," Unwin said. "They was already taking down all the bitchin' rides, you know, like the Devil Dish and the Parachute Drop. They already had a sign in the bumper cars that said closed. Wasn't nothing open but baby rides. So we went down by the games, and Webby saw the pitch till you win, and he paid 50 cents. And he seen that hat the Queer was wearing, and he pitched at that. But he kept missing it. And every time he missed, he got more in a bad mood, you know? And Steve, he's the guy who usually goes around saying, mellow out, like mellow out this and mellow out that. And why don't you fucking mellow out, you know? Only he was in a real piss-up-a-rope mood because he took this pill, you know? I don't know what kind of a pill. A red pill. Maybe it was even legal. But he keeps after Webby until I thought Webby was gonna hit him, you know? He goes, you can't even win that Queer's hat. You must really be wasted if you can't even win that Queer's hat. So finally the lady gives him a prize, even though the ring wasn't over it, because I think she wanted to get rid of us. I don't know, maybe she didn't, but I think she did. It was this noisemaker thing, you know? You blow it, and it puffs up and unrolls and makes a noise like a fart, you know? I used to have one of those. I got it for Halloween or New Year's or some fucking holiday. I thought it was pretty good, only I lost it. Or maybe somebody hawked it out of my pocket in the fucking play yard at school, you know? So then the fair's closing, and we're walking out, and Steve's still on Webby about not being able to win that Queer's hat, you know, and Webby ain't saying much. And I know that's a bad sign, but I was pretty faced, you know? So I knew I ought to, like, change the subject, only I couldn't think of no subject, you know? So when we get into the parking lot, Steve says, where you want to go, home? And Webby goes, let's cruise by the Falcon first and see if that Queer's around. Boudelier and Rademacher exchanged a glance. Boudelier raised a single finger and tapped it against his cheek. Although this doofus in the engineer boots didn't know it, he was now talking about first-degree murder. So I goes, no, I gotta get home. And Webby goes, you scared to go by that Queer bar? And I go, fuck no. And Steve still hires something, and he says, let's go grease some queer meat. Let's go grease some queer meat. Let's go grease. 11. The timing was just right enough so that things worked out wrong for everyone. Adrian Mellon and Don Haggerty came out of the Falcon after 2 beers, walked up past the bus station, and then linked hands. Neither of them thought about it. It was just something they did. It was 10:20. They reached the corner and turned left. The Kissing Bridge was almost half a mile upriver from here. They meant to cross Main Street Bridge, which was much less picturesque. The Kenduskeag was summer low, no more than 4 feet of water sliding listlessly around the concrete pilings. When the duster drew abreast of them, Steve Dubé had spotted the 2 of them coming out of the Falcon and gleefully pointed them out. They were on the edge of the span. Cut in, Webby Garton screamed. The 2 men had just passed under a streetlight, and he had spotted the fact that they were holding hands. This infuriated him, but not as much as the hat infuriated him. The big paper flower was nodding crazily this way and that. Cut in, goddammit! And Steve did. Chris Unwin would deny active participation in what followed, but Don Haggerty told a different story. He said that Garton was out of the car almost before it stopped, and that the other 2 quickly followed. There was talk, not good talk. There was no attempt at flippancy or false coquetry on Adrian's part this night. He recognized that they were in a lot of trouble. Give me that hat, Garton said. Give it to me, Queer. If I do, will you leave us alone? Adrian was wheezing with fright, almost crying, looking from Unwin to Dubé to Garton with terrified eyes. Just give me the fucker. Adrian handed it over. Garton produced a switch knife from the left front pocket of his jeans and cut it into 2 pieces. He rubbed the pieces against the seat of his jeans, then he dropped them to his feet and stomped them. Don Haggerty backed away a little while their attention was divided between Adrian and the hat. He was looking, he said, for a cop. Now, will you let us out? Adrian Mellon began, and that was when Garton punched him in the face, driving him back against the waist-high pedestrian railing of the bridge. Adrian screamed, clapping his hands to his mouth. Blood poured through his fingers. Aid! Haggerty cried and ran forward again. Dubé tripped him. Garton booted him in the stomach, knocking him off the sidewalk and into the roadway. A car passed. Haggerty rose to his knees and screamed at it. It didn't slow. The driver, he told Gardner and Reeves, never even looked around. Shut up, Queer, Dubé said, and kicked him in the side of the face. Haggerty fell on his side in the gutter, semi-conscious. A few moments later, he heard a voice. Chris Unwin's telling him to get away before he got what his friend was getting. In his own statement, Unwin verified giving this warning. Haggerty could hear thudding blows and the sound of his lover screaming. Adrian sounded like a rabbit in a snare, he told the police. Haggerty crawled back toward the intersection and the bright lights of the bus station, and when he was a distance away, he turned back to look. Adrian Mellon, who stood about 5'5" and might have weighed 135 pounds soaking wet, was being pushed from Garton to Dubé to Unwin in a kind of triple play. His body jittered and flopped like the body of a rag doll. They were punching him, pummeling him, ripping at his clothes. As he watched, he said, Garton punched Adrian in the crotch. Adrian's hair hung in his face, blood poured out of his mouth and soaked his shirt. Webby Garton wore 2 heavy rings on his right hand. One was a Derry high school ring, the other one he had made in shop class. An intertwined brass DB stood out 3 inches from this latter. The letters stood for the Dead Bugs, a metal band he particularly admired. The rings had torn Adrian's upper lip open and shattered 3 of his upper teeth at the gum line. "Help!" Haggerty shrieked. "Help! Help! They're killing him! Help!" The buildings of Main Street loomed dark and secret. No one came to help, not even from the one white island of light which marked the bus station, and Haggerty did not see how that could be. There were people in there. He had seen them when he and Aid walked past. Would none of them come to help? None at all? "Help! Help! They're killing him! Help! Please, for God's sake!" "Help!" a very small voice whispered from Don Haggerty's left. And then there was a giggle. "Bums rush!" Garton was yelling now, yelling and laughing. All 3 of them, Haggerty told Gardner and Reeves, had been laughing while they beat Adrian up. "Bums rush! Over the side!" "Bums rush! Bums rush! Bums rush!" Dubé chanted, laughing. "Help!" the small voice said again. And although the voice was grave, that little giggle followed again. It was like the voice of a child who cannot help itself. Haggerty looked down and saw the clown. And it was at this point that Gardner and Reeves began to discount everything that Haggerty said, because the rest was the raving of a lunatic. Later, however, Harold Gardner found himself wondering. Later, when he found that the Unwin boy had also seen a clown, or said he had, he began to have second thoughts. His partner either never had them or would never admit to them. The clown, Haggerty said, looked like a cross between Ronald McDonald and that old TV clown, Bozo, or so he thought at first. It was the wild tufts of orange hair that brought such comparisons to mind. But later consideration had caused him to think the clown really looked like neither. The smile painted over the white pancake was red, not orange, and the eyes were a weird, shiny silver. Contact lenses, perhaps. But a part of him thought then, and continued to think, that maybe that silver had been the real color of those eyes. He wore a baggy suit with big orange pom-pom buttons. On his hands were cartoon gloves. "If you need help, Don," the clown said, "help yourself to a balloon." And it offered the bunch it held in one hand. "They float," the clown said. "Down here we all float. Pretty soon your friend will float too." 12.